to check where...
Can you do a spin for me?
Okay, you have to stay still, remember?
And my arms going.
Why is this pattern so hot?
So I have a donut or sprinkles.
I don't have a donut with sprinkles to give you. Hi crafty people! Today Isabel and I are sharing with you this dress that I've made from a men's shirt that I had bought secondhand that my husband didn't need, and I ended up changing it into this dress. If you're new here, then my name's Marie and I share all sorts of sewing videos, and I want to motivate you to make and mend. This here isn't going to be a tutorial that you're going to be able to follow step by step and measurements. It's just to show you the skills that I used to make this dress from a shirt, and to encourage you that you can take an item of clothing that you're not using at your house and change it into something else if you want to. When I was looking for inspiration photos online about how I wanted to design this dress, I saw a dress on my Google Images search from Burberry. Now, I don't usually go to luxury designer clothing brands, and I especially wouldn't for children's clothes, but their dress on there was good. It was good inspiration for what I wanted to do, but it was 540 Australian dollars. So I figured I would use the inspiration from that dress to recreate this one. But it was only a $4 shirt that I was hacking up instead of paying $540 for a fairly similar thing, really, let's face it. If, like me, you're more likely to buy secondhand than you are to buy designer, then give me a thumbs up down below. This dress isn't perfect, and that's okay. I'll show you along the way some of the things that I did that didn't quite work out, or some of the things I'd do differently next time. So I'm going to start you back with the footage of when I first tried the shirt on Isabel and my thought process on how I was going to refashion this into a dress. With this shirt, I'm going to try and keep as many features that are already on here as possible. So it is going to be a button front dress, and we are going to be keeping the button sleeves, and it also has these two pockets here. So I'm going to be cutting the skirt piece out of this kind of top part here. So this part will be the skirt, and this part is where I'll cut the bodice. The collar doesn't look too bad. We'll obviously make it smaller. In order to adjust this shirt into a dress for Isabel, I'm going to be basing it on a few things. Firstly, I have this pattern here for the dress that she's actually wearing underneath, which she just picked to wear it today.
It's dry, Mum.
The painting is dry. Yes? So we've got this pattern here which I've cloned from a dress that she already used to wear. If you don't know how to clone a pattern, I've made a video on that. It's really easy to take an item of clothing and make a pattern like this, and it's a great skill to know. So I'll link that video down below if you're interested in watching. But this pattern that I made for the dress is actually for a stretchy fabric, and because this flannelette is not stretchy, I can't directly use this pattern. I'm going to be using Isabel's pajama shirt that fits her really well to see how I want the bodice to fit on her dress. We'll give it a go, and I'm looking forward to showing you how I turn this shirt into a dress.
Let's get making. Men's shirt to a dress.
The first thing I needed to do while making this dress was to separate all the pieces out. I cut the front from the back, cut off the sleeves, and then I had to carefully take off the collar because I was going to reuse that part. So I used my unpicker to unpick the seams all the way around the front part of the collar and the lining so that I could re-sew that back on the dress when it was done. Because I'm working with this pre-made shirt, I actually don't have very much fabric to play with, so I had to be very specific about how I laid out my pattern pieces. I'm using this template of the bodice piece from the dress I made for Isabel, and I'm placing it down to get a shape of the top of the bodice. Then I'm using the width of her pajama shirt and extending the width of this bodice to match that pajama shirt, and then I'm moving the sleeve holes over to match.
Something like that. Maybe.
Clearly very confident, I then cut out that front bodice piece. With the leftover fabric I had here on the front of the shirt, I cut out the largest rectangle I could fit to make the front of Isabel's skirt. I made sure that it was as long as a skirt that I have previously made for her and as big as the fabric would allow. I then used those pieces that I cut from the front part of the dress to then cut out the back pieces exactly the same. I spent a bit of time making sure that the plaid on the front and the back of the skirt and bodice were going to match each other so that it looked uniform the whole way around the dress. But now in retrospect, I wish that I just used the most of the fabric that I had available, because the skirt did turn out shorter than I hoped that it would. So here, where I'm pulling the pieces of the bodice on the front down so that it matches the plaid on the back, I wish that I just used the most of the fabric I had instead of ending up cutting it shorter just to match the pattern. I cut down the seam of the sleeve so I could open it out flat, and it meant that the button and buttonhole were still attached to each other. On the side with the button and buttonhole is where I lined up the sleeve from my pattern piece and Isabel's pajama shirt to trace out where I wanted the shape of her new sleeve to be. Then I used that first sleeve as the template to cut out the second sleeve exactly the same, making sure to cut it with the button and buttonhole still attached.
Scary part's done. Now to try and sew it back together again.
I had to lower the front neckline of the bodice.
That would have been bad.
I only needed to lower the neckline on the front of the bodice, and then I unstitched that button on the top there because I was going to utilize the button that is already attached to the collar. Then it was all ready for me to sew down the side seams of the skirt and on the shoulder seams of the bodice. For each of the seams, I did a French seam, which means first sewing it with the wrong sides together, the right sides facing out, and then you snip off any of the excess. Then you press it down with your invisible iron and sew it again. This time you're sewing it with the right sides together so that your original seam is encased, and it will stop your fabric from fraying. Probably don't use an invisible iron. You probably should really iron it, but you know. I then used French seams to sew the bodice pieces together at the shoulder seams. I removed the bottom button on the skirt because it was only going to be in the way of the hem, and then I used a rolled hem to finish off the bottom of the skirt piece. A rolled hem is where you fold up the bottom twice so that the raw edge of the fabric isn't visible, and then you sew along the fold that you have created. I used one of the blue lines on the printed pattern on the skirt to help me know where to fold up the skirt so that the hem was even the whole way around. Next, it was time for me to have a go at the collar, which was the part that I felt most apprehensive about. First, I measured how long the collar was on Isabel's pajama shirt, and then I worked out how much on the actual collar I needed to chop off so that it would be the same length. I did my best to cut the collar in a part that would be pretty inconspicuous on the back, where the pattern kind of matched pretty well together. Then I needed to sew it together again and sew through the lining as well separately so that it was still open enough that I could sew it onto the shirt. I cut off the excess and made sure to sew through that lining piece, and then realized that it was going to look pretty messy having the raw edges there. And even though it was going to be on the underneath of the collar, I still wanted to finish them off a bit nicer than they were. So I decided to do a zigzag stitch along the side of that join on each side. I hand stitched each side of the join flat against the collar so that it wouldn't be as bulky on the underneath of Isabel's collar, and hoping that it would be a little less noticeable. I'm not entirely happy with how the collar turned out, but it's acceptable. Then I noticed that the sleeve on the shirt that I was wearing needed a bit of repairs, so while I had my hand sewing needle out, I just gave that a little fix too. Then it was time to reattach the collar, so I placed the edge of the fabric around the neck hole inside the collar and pinned it around in place so that I was able to then sew it down. When sewing the collar in place, you want to make sure to be catching the back of the collar as well. So you don't want to be sewing too close to the edge and risking not catching the back. There was one part where I didn't quite get the lining for maybe about 1 centimeter there, but it won't affect it, so I just decided to leave it the way it was. To attach the sleeve, I first needed to do a gathering stitch to make the sleeve small enough to fit into the armhole. I set my machine on a long stitch, and then once I've sewn along the edge without going forwards and backwards at the end, I'm able to pull the top thread, which will gather it up ready to fit inside the sleeve armhole. I pin each of the sides in place first, and then I spread out the gathers so they're even before pinning them in place as well. Don't forget to reduce your stitch length back down again because it was set longer before when we did the gathering stitch. Of course, I'm doing a French seam again, so I'm chopping off the excess, then folding the sleeve out so that it is right sides together and sewing through the seam again. To finish off the bodice, I'm sewing down the sleeve and side seams together at the same time, and I'm starting by pinning under the arm seam to make sure that that is even.
It's my second night of working on this dress and it's almost getting there. I'm pretty happy with it. There are a few things that haven't quite worked out, but we're getting there. What I'm going to do next is baste stitch on my sewing machine the skirt to the shirt. Now a basting stitch is a really long stitch. It's easy to pull out if it's incorrect, so you're not like unpicking stitches forever if you've done it incorrectly. And it's just to kind of tack it in place. It's not going to be the stitch that I use to keep this garment together in the end. The reason I'm just basting it together is I want to check where it's going to sit so that it looks right on her waist. It's a little hard to judge, and I want to try first matching this button on the skirt with where the button should kind of sit based on the distancing between the top buttons. So I'll have a go matching it where the button would work, but then I'll have to try it on her to see if it works with how it looks on her.
I did a gathering stitch the whole length of the skirt piece so that I was then able to gather it together and fit it onto the bodice, and then I did my long basting stitch to attach them both together. When I basted this together, I had the right sides together, and because I'm doing French seams, it would have worked a lot better if I had them facing wrong sides together, so I could just sew straight over my basting stitches. The next morning I was able to try it on Isabel. I didn't take any video footage, but I did take this cute photo. I was happy with how the waist was placed, so I was able to sew a French seam where I had sewn those basting stitches. To give this dress a little bit more shape so it wasn't too baggy, I decided to sew a piece of elastic in the back waist seam of the dress. It gave the dress a little bit more shape while still being loose and comfortable. I zigzag stitched the elastic to the waist seam so you're not able to see any of the stitching from the front of the dress. The last thing I needed to do was reattach the button, and then it was ready for her to wear. So let's try it on her and see how it looks, and compare what it looked like before.
So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed watching me transform this men's shirt into this sweet dress for Isabel. If you enjoyed the making of this dress, you might also enjoy some of the other items of kids' clothes that I've made before. I'll leave a link in the description box to a playlist you might be interested in to watch next. If you're keen to come back and see some of my future videos, then don't forget to press subscribe so that YouTube knows to send you some of my new videos as they come out.
YouTube.
YouTube. Yep. My next two videos I'm really excited about. I'm going to be sharing with you a Goldilocks and the Three Bears costume dress up for the kids, which I'm really excited about, and I will also be sharing the gender reveal of the baby that I'm pregnant with due in February. So if you don't want to miss both the video about the dress ups I'm making and the gender announcement, then please remember to press subscribe, and if you press the bell, you'll definitely be notified when those videos are
Definitely, Mom.
definitely when those videos are uploaded. It's been great to share this video with you, and I hope in the future to get to share some more thrift, flip, refashioning items like this. If you follow me on Instagram, you might see some of the things that I'm working on over there as well. So until next time, go get creative, and we'll see you later.